there is one type of film that is constantly scorned as lacking in artistry or singularity of vision, you need to look no further than the much maligned Blockbuster. We've all heard the criticisms before. Those soulless products that play to the cheap seats and destroy art as we know it. I mean, I don't know how you can't see the artistic purity in something like this.
Yeah. I'm Batman.
But that's just the thing though. Just because The Flash is terrible doesn't mean that every other blockbuster automatically is. For there are great blockbusters made by passionate filmmakers that imbue as much of themselves in the work they produce. Filmmakers who put the large amounts of money entrusted to them to good use. I feel that the reason the many different film iterations of Batman are so memorable is because behind every good adaptation, there is a director with a vision who brings their own style to the character of Batman, making sure that you would never mistake their version of the iconic comic book character for that of somebody else. And the best example of this is none other than the man that started it all, Tim Burton.
Let's get nuts.
Now, there is a great Batman hiding behind this CGI Michael Keaton puppet. When he created the 1989 film, Tim Burton didn't just try to recreate the Christopher Reeve Superman. Instead, he imbued his own unique aesthetic to the entire film, turning Gotham into a mixture of German expressionism and Gothic fairy tales, taking his inspiration from Fritz Lang's masterpiece Metropolis and Terry Gilliam's Brazil, and he combined the exaggerated set design with artificial darkness to create a unique take on the Caped Crusader. Burton's Batman isn't a cool action hero, he's a tortured loner, because all of Burton's best movies are about tortured loners. And it's this aesthetic and thematic through line across his work that cements Burton as an auteur. But let's back up a bit. What's an auteur? Well, once upon a time in the late 1950s, a bunch of French guys who were just as done with mainstream French cinema of the time as I am with our current media landscape decided to band together to break the established rules of the industry, and thus created films that bore their individualistic mark on them. The singular and unique vision of these films earned them the title author, or in French, auteur. Fast forward a couple of years and the term migrates to America, brought by Andreu Sarris. Contrary to its original meaning, which denoted a departure from the classic cinema of the time, auteur was used to retrospectively describe directors that managed to reconcile their individual vision with the genre conventions of Hollywood. So, John Ford became synonymous with westerns, Orson Welles with film noir, Walt Disney, yes, that Walt Disney, with fairy tales, and the rock star of the auteur theory, Alfred Hitchcock, with thrillers. And here's where the superhero film enters. Superhero films are sometimes dismissed as unworthy, and yet they are not inherently different than the genres Ford or Hitchcock mastered. The key difference between the assembly line of the MCU and a true gem like Batman Returns is not the genre, but the presence of an auteur who wishes to develop their own unique thematic and aesthetic identity, working creatively within the genre's conventions. In this way, Burton creates a haunted gothic version of Batman, but his brand of darkness is significantly different than that employed by Christopher Nolan in his own Batman trilogy, which leans towards realism. And say what you will about the bad hand Schumacher was dealt by a studio that was more interested in toy sales than creative expression, but you can't deny that he still put his all into crafting the most cartoonish, colorful, campy, and crazy celebration of comic book extravagance.
an elegant weapon for a more civilized age, before the dark times.
The sad truth of the matter is that 9 times out of 10, blockbusters aren't even made by visionaries like Tim Burton or great artists like Joel Schumacher, but by directors for hire who have little creative say but still have to carry out the thankless tasks imposed upon them by the studios. After all, when you're dealing with as much money as what gets poured into modern tentpole movies, creativity and artistic experimentation become laughably irrelevant to the conversation. You can't be creative when you are required to make $1 billion just to make your money back. But if you follow this line of thinking to its logical conclusion, you get the worst kind of movies. The Flash, or perhaps to use an example that didn't crater at the box office, Spiderman No Way Home is a studio executive's dream come true. It's a textureless and entirely safe happy meal of a movie that stands on the shoulders of better artists that have come before it.
Double money.
To very boldly say absolutely nothing besides reaffirm the unshakable power of the almighty brand. The Flash features 3 different Batmen from 3 different unique artists, and yet it couldn't even be bothered to try to replicate neither the somber darkness of Burton, the glossy excess of Schumacher, or the operatic grandeur of Snyder, let alone, crazy idea, leave enough room for Randy Muschietti to develop his own distinct vision. If blockbusters aren't allowed to innovate, to challenge, or even to lovingly pay tribute to what has come before them, like what Barton did with German Expressionism, then they cease to be art and instead become meaningless toy commercials.
These studios become like these big corporations, and you're having to like design characters for Happy Meals before you design them for the film, you know?
Has there ever been a better example of this struggle between studio and artists in recent history than the 2 different cuts of Justice League? One is a deformed mess that tried and failed to be Marvel's Avengers, and the other is a flawed, for sure, but also daring modern epic that's proud to display its filmmaker's name above the title instead of concealing it beneath an avalanche of studio logos that advertise the brand. Zack Snyder's Justice League exemplifies why even blockbusters still need artists just as much as indie or art house movies do, because it is wrong to abandon such a huge category as blockbuster film, which inevitably will attract the biggest of audiences and commercial revenue to its luck, just because it isn't Godard. If all the greatest blockbusters are still made by passionate visionaries, then they can't just be consumer products. There is a tiny, imperceptible gray zone where commerciality and artistry intersect, and it's in this small intersection that the Auteur Blockbuster resides. I refer to those visionary directors that, while abiding by the conventions of blockbuster film, nonetheless manage to leave their own personal mark upon these films that elevates them from the bulk. Not all artistic blockbusters are automatically financially successful, but all great blockbusters,
the ones that really matter,
and are not just flavor of the month hits, carry the passions of the great artists that made them. You get true genre-defining classics that deserve as much analysis and reverence as any Antonioni or Bergman film. You get the Wachowski sisters' The Matrix. You get Gore Verbinski's Pirates of the Caribbean. You get Matt Reeves' The Batman. Matt Reeves' The Batman, and notice how I specifically called it that, is the perfect antidote to the corporate sludge of The Flash. The Batman is a Fincher-inspired neo-noir, offering a modern deconstruction on the character and his vigilantism with stellar cinematography, incredible music, and Edward Cullen serving broodiness and edginess. And honestly, It might just be the greatest superhero movie of all time, in my opinion.
What?
Because the Batman didn't need to pander to teenagers, it didn't need to sacrifice its tone to fit the in-house style. It's so much above that line of thinking. So as the audience rewarded this film by actually going to watch it, the studio of course missed the point and created the Reevesverse with the inevitable sequels and spin-offs we didn't need. Still, my point stands. The Batman in itself is one of those rare artistic triumphs that owes its success to the director behind the camera rather than the IP in front of it. I mean, that's why this thing is called the Reevesverse, because even the studio executives understand that Matt Reeves is as critical to its success as Tim Burton was back in the 1980s. And this is the reason I chose to center this video on Batman movies, because it's the only property I can think of where every new version is entrusted to the hands of one of those blockbuster auteurs, thus proving how valuable they are. Batman is an endlessly malleable character, and that's why he has been around for so long. He can be a gothic fallen prince, a camp icon, a down-to-earth detective, a grizzled vigilante, or just a sad emo boy listening to Nirvana. Auteur theory champions the individual's voice, and it's the voice those individuals brought to him that made Batman as enduring as he is. Batman can be everything, but not everywhere, not all at once, not as a multiversal multitude of voices screaming over each other so that they end up saying nothing. You shouldn't try to be everything, because sometimes all you should aspire to be is just Ken.